Serene Greenway. I am a failing consumer sciences extension educator here with the University of Idaho. And joining and managing the chat today is Amy Robertson, who is also a failing consumer sciences extension educator with Idaho. In our series, we have educators from different cooperative extension systems. So we really hope that you are attending today, but you come back to check out our other presenters and topics. So to get right into that, I know that as you were joining, some of you did share in the chat where you are joining from today. I didn't pop in there, but I'm from Marsing, Idaho. I'm here at my office. And right before we go right into our topic of electric pressure cooking, I'm launching a very quick poll. This poll is just to find out a little bit about you. And specifically, the first question is this your first extension class, presentation, workshop? Have you ever been to an activity or event? We're just trying to gauge if we're reaching new audiences. So that's the first question. Your second question on your poll series there is this your first time participating in the Get the Dish? I'm hoping yes, since this is our first one of us ever doing this. So we're pretty excited about it. And then the third question is, what is your experience level with electric pressure cooking? So it's very specific to today's topic that I'll be covering, hopefully adequately enough for what you were hoping to gather from this presentation. And then if you could share how many individuals are joining with you today. So I'm going to give it just 5 more seconds, give everyone an opportunity to answer that, and then I'll end that poll and start going into my slideshow. All right, so I'm going to end that. Thank you everyone for participating in that. We super appreciate it. It just helps us make sure that we're gaining new audiences, or if we're lacking in an area, we can do better in that. So thank you. But to go straight into it, a lot of times people believe that they're familiar with pressure cooking and they may not be. And so to give an overview of what pressure cooking truly is, it is a food preparation method so that we can lock in, so we're trapping steam as the form of heating and cooking that food product that we are trying to prepare. Some of the offset benefits of pressure cooking is that it can retain flavors and nutrients of the food in a sometimes more desirable method, and it can save energy compared to other traditional cooking methods that we have available to us. So there can be benefits. Now remember, just because they can be doesn't mean that is the case every single time. So something to keep in mind as we go throughout our pressure cooking topic today. So as we talk about what are some of those benefits that I kind of hinted at just now, pressure cooking can be fast. So a lot of vegetables that we may choose to prepare in this appliance can cook as little as 5 minutes, when traditionally they may take, 10, 15 and upwards of 20 or 30 minutes. The same with some of our meat dishes. We can drastically reduce that cooking time from our regular cooking method. And by that, we're referring to stovetop. Something a little more traditional would be using the microwave to cook food products. And then we also have our oven appliance. And so with that, this is just a simple chart to show some of the ways that we can reduce some of that cooking time for some of our chosen dishes. Another thing with an electric pressure cooker is that it can save energy. Again, not always the case, so we don't want to make a solid statement, but in general, pressure cooking is going to help reduce our energy use, and it can be a more efficient use of that appliance's cooking capacity. So it may use up to 70% less electricity compared to other appliances. And again, we're referring to some of those traditional appliances, such as the oven, our stovetop method, as we're talking to a range, as well as still included in this is the microwave, because that has been a very common preparation method, even though it may not always be the chosen method when we're creating dishes or meals. And when electric pressure cookers are fully sealed, they can actually, during the cooking process, they can utilize other resources aside from just our energy use, but such as our water use, because we are locking in those appliances to create that steam in order to cook the food product, it can actually maximize the use of the water resource. And it's about 75% less when we're steaming in an electric pressure cooker compared to other types of water use in the cooking process. So we're referring to boiling. We're also referring to like steam blanching or steam cooking. So it really can maximize those energy savings across the board, which is pretty wonderful. And pressure cooking is healthy. Again, it can be healthy, just as we can, make brownies that can be healthy, not necessarily are, but we can incorporate pieces that are healthy. And so one key piece of electric pressure cookers, though, is that we can retain a high nutritive value of our food product, and that's through retaining those vitamins. And so that's something that not a lot of people are always aware of. And by pressure cooking our food, we are flash cooking those vegetables, and they're retaining and preserving some of those nutrients. I know this chart is a little difficult to see, unfortunately, but as we are comparing our pressure cooking to steaming and boiling, we can see that we're retaining the natural vitamins of our food product at about a 90 to 95% rate, versus if we're steaming, we are still retaining those vitamins, those nutrients that we want in our food product, but it is slightly lower. And then boiling is even lower with that 40 to 65% range. And so while a difficult chart to see, it shows you this is a comparative analysis when we're talking pressure cooking, steaming, microwaving, roasting, and boiling those different foods. And we're referring to vitamin C, B1, B2, and B6. So some of the key things that we're looking for in our nutritive value of our food consumption. So to get right into it, if you have never handled a pressure cooking appliance, or if you really want to know what are all of these different components, I'm going to start by showing you some of them. So with a pressure cooker, we have our base system. Actually going to stop share just for a moment, see if you can see me. I'm hoping you can see me a little better, but behind me I have a few different models set up that I'll be going into towards the end, because as we go throughout today's presentation, a lot of individuals will refer to an electric pressure cooker as the Instapot. And technically the brand name is Instant Pot, but it is a very well trademarked appliance. And so with that, we want to really emphasize that you can do pressure cooking across all appliances and models and brands. And so as we talk about pressure cooking, we're referring to them in general as an electric appliance. So the first thing that we are going to be discussing, though, is the inner pot. And so the inner pot of our appliance is going to contain the food product. We'll be talking a little bit about pot cooking, which kind of adds some layers to the process of cooking using an electric pressure cooker. But the inner pot is what fits into the base of the unit. Dependent on whatever brand or model that we're using, we're going to have a base unit that contains the electricity and the plug-in and the heating element. And then we're going to have the inner pot where we'll be placing our food, or sometimes we're placing a rack, and then we're placing that food product within that unit. This is removable. It is intended to be washed after each and every use. So just because we're using a newer or a funner appliance does not remove the need to maintain cleanliness within the kitchen and cleaning that appliance. And we'll talk about that, but also we need to clean the inner pot after each and every use. And this is essential for cooking. If you do not have an inner pot for your appliance, you do need to purchase one, and you'd want to make sure that it is intended for your brand and for your model of pressure cooker, as inner pots should not be interchangeable amongst different appliances. So that is what that inner pot looks like. They are stainless steel. Sometimes there are some brands that have a non-stick coated option available. So that's pretty great to know. But the next piece that I would like to share as we discuss the parts of an electric pressure cooker and how they are specific to the use of cooking is the inner silicone ring. So this here, I am demonstrating pieces from a Mueller brand. It's not a very common brand, but I found it so that I'd have a variety of appliances for us to talk about. So this is my lid. This is the silicone or inner ring. I'm hoping you can see that. And so if you watched me, I was peeling it I was putting quite a bit of pressure on pulling that from inside here where it sits to create that airtight seal when I am locking my lid into place onto my appliance heating base. And so with this, that silicone inner ring, just as we should be washing that inner pot after each and every use, the silicone inner ring should be removed from the appliance and it should be washed. And because we can retain food particles, moisture, and it's a great environment for us to have some of those pathogens survive and thrive, right? So we want to make sure that we're replacing that after each and every use. But as you can see, I pulled it out quite easily with a heavy tug, and now I need to place it back into that appliance so it will serve its function of creating that airtight seal when I am ready to pressure cook with it. So the next piece that I really want to point out, and it will vary, you know, how closely they're placed on each lid, but you can see that there is a shield on the left-hand side of the photo, and I'm hoping you can see that writing where it's labeled as a shield. And then you can see that there is a floating valve, and so it does have a little silicone. And so this picture is actually coming from an Instant Pot brand modeled appliance, but here I just have the lid from that Mueller that I started describing, and so it's a little further apart on the lid. However, both of these different features are contained on this lid, even though it's a different brand. The shield here is intended to prevent foods from going into our vent port, which is really key through the cooking process, especially when it's time to vent or if we're going to seal that. And it's a great way to keep those food particles out of that vent port and clogging it up and creating malfunction of our appliance. And so this is a great way for that to keep from happening. And I'm going to guess, I'm betting you can guess what I'm going to say next, but this too should be washed each and every time. So that lid should be washed and that shield should be removed. It does cross on and off and it can loosen over time. So you do want to be careful applying it onto the lid and removing it. But that is a very key feature that you're going to want to use, especially when you have those foamier foods or you are cooking something in your electric pressure cooker and it's at a higher capacity than just on the base of the inner pot. And then that float valve is what seals in, and once pressure is built up, it is actually going to be locking your lid completely into place. And so it's actually part of the cooking process, but it's a safety feature as well. So you really want to make sure that you are utilizing that feature and washing that each and every time. The next piece that we can see here, and this is a really big close-up on an appliance, but that is the condensation cup. And so when we are cooking some foods with a high moisture content or a longer cooking time, then sometimes we can have some condensation build up. And we want to make sure that as it's collecting, we keep an eye on that. You want to make sure that you are emptying that over time, but that is sometimes it fills. Sometimes you can cook, 5 different ingredient or dishes in your appliance and not have any even drop go into your condensation cup. So it is really particular to the different dishes that you're creating and how much liquid is being used in that process. And so as we look at stews, stocks, soups, that's where we're going to see that condensation cup more commonly build up and fill with liquid. So the big one that I get when people are asking me, okay, so I've learned all of these parts of the electric pressure cooker. I have learned that I should clean all of these essential elements each and every time I'm using my appliance, just as I would a traditional stovetop pot. But this appliance has some unique features that my stovetop cooking does not. My stovetop pot does not have a pre-programmed function on it. So how do I use that? So to turn this back around, you can see here a specific brand and model is used in the photo, but you can actually, if I'm standing here and if you were really, really close, you may be able to see with my appliance that I have specific functions that, while they differ from the photo here, they're still a pre-programmed function that I can select to actually cook and build up pressure within my appliance to steam cook the food that's in here. And so there's some models and brands that have several functions, some have limited options available, but ultimately they're all designed to be programmed by that manufacturer that you select, whether it's going to be porridge or a multigrain, and it's intended to have a pre-programmed steam pressure PSI buildup that you're going to have within your appliance and a certain amount of time. So with that, a lot of individuals think, oh, well, if I'm cooking a soup, I'm going to have to select the soup button, when the more used to your appliance that you become, you can actually find that you could select, meat and stew, and maybe you're reading your owner's manual and find that it's going to cook that food at a higher pressure. And maybe you could even select a different function, even though it's labeled for one specific thing. So for example, poultry, just because I click poultry doesn't mean I have to only cook poultry under that function. But it is really key to read your own owner's manual to understand better what those functions are going to be. And sometimes they will indicate what the pre-programmed function, what it is intended to reach. So it helps you decide, okay, is this soup going to be taking my pot to a medium level? Am I at a medium high, or am I at a high? So reading through that owner's manual and reading through some of the indicators that they have pre-programmed into those functions can be super beneficial to you as you start using your device. And the other thing too is I have for you here today, there's 4 different appliances that we're going to be looking at. And with that, they all are slightly different, even within a brand. So I've talked about Instapot, as they have kind of been known for the pressure cooker, just as in the past, Crock-Pot branded itself very nicely as the slow cooker. At the end of the day, even within that brand, different models are going to conduct different functions. And so it is important to get to know which exact model. Once you know the process of pressure cooking, you can interchange your functions, maybe some of the different dishes that you're doing, but it is key to understand some of those functions, because 13 psi in one pressure cooker as a pre-programmed function may only be 11 in another. And then you'll find that maybe the cooking time or the cooking outcome of that dish is going to vary just based on what the pre-programmed functions that you are using are, or even which model. And Amy, I know that you're on right now, and the chart that I'm sharing here is one that you created. And I was hoping that you could just pop in and share with us this chart about altitude adjustment and why it matters.
I'm sure, Serene. So as most of us are familiar, when our altitude changes, then the temperature of our boiling water is going to change. So that's the same with pressure, is that temperature is going to be different when I'm at sea level versus where I am here in Idaho, a little above 2,000 feet. And then there are several places in Idaho and lots of other states where the altitude is even higher. So if you are in one of those states or areas that have a higher altitude, then you need to just be aware that you might need to adjust your time for your different recipes a little bit. So this table is just kind of a guideline to start with. It might not always, work out exactly the way you planned, but it's a great way to start. So if you are at that, 3,000 or higher feet in elevation, then you want to add a certain percent of cooking time. So that doesn't mean, 5 or 10 minutes. It means 5 or 10%. So you just want to take whatever the cooking time is for that recipe and then add that extra percentage to help ensure that your food is going to be at that required doneness.
Thank you so much, Amy. I really just wanted to give a shout out because she did create this recommendation table format. And just to, kind of hit home again with what Amy said, maybe you are at 4,000 feet and you are cooking a dish that has about a 20-minute cooking time. If we look at this recommendation chart, it's telling us we're going to add 10%, not the 10 minutes, as Amy stated. And so instead of a 20-minute cooking time, we're looking at about a 22-minute cooking time. And that's how that chart is recommended. Again, this is just a generality, especially as our different elevations are going to impact, as Amy said, the way that water boils. The reason why that's so important to us when we are pressure cooking is because we are using steam to cook our food, and the way that that water heats up, just as the way that water boils, does matter in the process. So thank you so much, Amy. I put her on the spot for this today, but I thought, well, she deserves credit. So some of you may be familiar or know of releasing of pressure when we talk about pressure cooking. And the reason why you may know about it is because some people may be uncomfortable with cooking with an electric pressure cooking appliance because they know that there is built up steam in there and they are nervous for that pressure release. When we talk about the release of pressure, there are two different methods. One is the natural release, and you'll see that sometimes in the pressure cooking recipes that come with your appliance. A lot of them come with not only an owner's manual, but a little recipe guide, which can be super fun to learn some new recipes that you could do in your brand new appliance. Or you may have it referred to as NPR, which is natural pressure release. So natural release or natural pressure release. Those are both the same function, though, and we'll talk about those in just a second. And then the other pressure release method is quick release. This is the one that may make individuals a little more hesitant or fearful of using this appliance, but we'll talk about how we can do that in a very safe method so that we can eliminate that fear as well as reduce any risk that can come with using an electric pressure cooking appliance to prepare a dish or a meal. So for that natural pressure release, natural pressure release, it is a way of allowing that built up pressure in your appliance dissipate or reduce on its own. So as I shared with you that there's different programmable functions that you can click on one and it will then start cooking that product. It will then start building up the pressure. You're sealing your pot. Dependent on your recipe, there's different functions that you may be doing. You may be sauteing something and then going ahead and locking your lid into place after you've added your liquid, you've sauteed, added liquid, and now you're going to start building up that pressure by putting it onto sealing. And then once it's up to pressure, that's when that programmed function will begin its countdown time, because now it's at the intended heat temperature for that dish. And then, maybe your time has done with that pre-programmed function, and now you're going to let it naturally release for 10 minutes. Maybe you're going to do a combo. There are some recipes where you're doing a natural release for 10 or 15 minutes, and then you're doing a quick release. It's really dependent on what specific item you're going to be making in your appliance. So if you let the pressure naturally release in your appliance based on your recipe, it can take upwards of 30 minutes, especially if you've got a soup, a stew, or a thick stock that you've got going in there. And the reason why your recipe will state that you want to do a natural release on these is because you have so much liquid. And this is also with our starchier foods, but you have so much liquid or so much foam that can build up through that pressure cooking, as well as a sudden change in temperature, a release of that pressure, that you're going to want to let it cool more slowly on its own. And so it's really important to make sure that when your recipe says natural release, you stop and think why, because I have done a stew that I was like, well, I'm in a hurry and I don't have, 30 minutes to let this cool down. I need to get dinner on in the next 10 minutes. And boy, have I learned that, yep, that recommendation's for a reason, because all of a sudden you can have spurting liquid coming out of your appliance. So you really want to be mindful when it says natural release, what you're cooking and why it may have that in place. And even when you are in a hurry, heed that release of pressure recommendation. And so the more liquid that you have in there, the longer time it will take to depressurize, because we have so much built up pressure, as well as that liquid that takes longer to cool off. And it will help when you're wanting foods to stay intact. And like I shared, those foamy foods, if you're doing something like beans, highly discourage you from doing a quick release, because that cool down time and a natural release will really benefit that food product. The other release method would be the quick release. So as we look at this photo here, it's quickly releasing that steam. And this is something that, dependent again on what is in your pressure cooker, it will impact how long it takes to vent and allow that steam to be released from the appliance. So it can take between 1 and 2 minutes. It shouldn't take longer than 2 minutes. If it does, you may have needed to have a natural release followed by a quick release recommendation time. And then again, this is for something when you're trying to maybe flash cook something, or you have foods that could overcook. So we're talking about seafood. It's a really, really common one when you're cooking seafood in your electric pressure cooker for you to do a quick release so that you're not continuing to cook that food product. Now that you got it up to pressure, you flash cooked it in that high temperature, and now you want to release that so that you don't have, some rubbery or undesirable texture on that seafood. The same with vegetables, because you can quickly cook those vegetables and retain some of that natural texture, some of that crunch or crispness. And if you do a natural release, it could overcook those a little. That could be just a preference on that texture of that food product. And then again, those high starch foods are really not going to be ideal for a quick release option. So it is highly recommended that when you are going to release or remove the lid from your appliance, that you safely remove it from your face. So what that means is that as I am removing my lid, if it were locked into place, I'd cook something, whether a natural release or a quick release, you always want to be opening the appliance and that lid away from your face. You want to use the lid as a shield. I know that we're all adults on here today, but it is a really big reminder, because you may think, well, I let this naturally release for the last 20 minutes. No way can it be that hot. No way can there be steam. And you betcha, you can still open that lid and have quite a large amount of steam being released from that appliance. Because remember, these appliances are intended to be locked into place and hold in steam pressure in order to cook our food. And so we want to be mindful of that for the safety's sake. You want to protect your beautiful face and your arms. So in that process, use that lid as a shield and tilt it away from yourself. It's even more so to be mindful of this when we are cooking with youth within our kitchen, so that we don't injure them, especially when they may not understand the importance of that. We recommend that you wear waterproof, heat-resistant silicone gloves when at all possible. I know that I've had some individuals tell me, yeah, but if I wear those waterproof gloves, they kind of tend to slip a little bit. So you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate oven mitts or hot pads that work best for you. But be mindful that water or moist heat can still penetrate through cloth fabric and still, burn you. So be mindful of that. And that's why we recommend those silicone gloves. So just as we don't recommend that you set it and forget it when it comes to a slow cooker, we do recommend that you are still present for an electric pressure cooker. I have a lot of people who've shared with me over the years, oh, it's so easy. I can set it, I can leave the house, I can go to work, I can actually program it so that when I come back from work, my meal is going to be ready to consume. Unfortunately, we do not recommend that you are operating your appliance when you are not home, especially because we know how hot these can get and that it can cause damage if someone is not keeping an eye on the appliance. It is using electricity. It's always subject to having a malfunction, no matter what a great appliance it is. So we want to be making sure we're operating these safely. And then we don't recommend that you deep fry in electric pressure cookers unless your appliance and model states that you can. So your specific brand and model, because I have seen over the years, one specific brand has one specific model that they recommend that you can use to deep fry in it. And so you really want to make sure you're using that specific model and using it in the way it's intended for that cooking process of deep frying. Otherwise, aside from the one that I am aware of, these are not intended to deep fry your foods in. And so that comes to the next point of not overfilling filling your inner pot. So remember, we have our cooking base, that actual electric appliance itself, and then we have that inner pot that contains all of our food product, or as I shared, you may have something and then your food product in a smaller little dish. But with that, you do not want to overfill these appliances because we're trying to turn that liquid into that steam pressure to conduct cooking. And so if you overfill it, you're going to risk that it could actually damage the appliance. It could over boil up in the goal of creating that steam, and we can actually damage that appliance, so we aren't even able to use it. And so with that, the max line that is printed on your inner pot, so it's actually, you can't even see it on this photo here because it's actually higher for that max line, and that is not a recommendation on any of the different appliances that we have for pressure cooking. That max line is not intended as a guide for pressure cooking. It's just talking about a max fill line for that inner pot in general. And so you really want to make sure that when you are cooking, you consider that it should be no more than 2/3 of the way full. But you have those soups, those stews, those beans, those foods that do expand through the cooking process because they are taking on liquid. And so with that, you want to make sure that you are making that max fill even lower, because again, as that food expands, we don't want it to get to the point that it can expand so much that it's damaging our appliance. So I know I shared a bit of this on the front end as I was demonstrating the different pieces of our electric pressure cooker, but cleaning is so essential. Not only that inner pot, not only that lid and the silicone inner ring that we have, not only our valve or our shield, but also the appliance itself. Remember, just as you have a pot that you should be cooking or cleaning each and every time that you are cooking, the same goes for your electric pressure cooking appliance. Remember, we want to treat it well and use it appropriately, use it the way it's intended, so that we're going to be able to retain it and use it for years to come. So you can clean the exterior of the base with a damp cloth, and I say damp, not wet, because remember, this is the electric component of our appliance that helps everything function appropriately so that we can use that. Another thing that you want to know is that we do not recommend that you place your base within the dishwasher. There are some models that state that you can place your lid in the silicone ring in the top shelf of your dishwasher. I would recommend that you read that owner's manual and that you proceed with caution, because just as we have all these different appliances intended for pressure cooking, they all are slightly different. So are our dishwashers and how hot they can get even on that second shelf. So be mindful of that in the process. And I know this isn't the best photo right here, but this is actually a little dampened little brush to help get in the crevices, because there are components that, remember, we're trying to lock everything in really tight. And so cleaning them can be a little difficult to kind of stick our finger in there with a damp cloth to get in. So you might even grab a brush and try to remove some of the debris that we can visually see. And just as we're trying to clean everything, including that stainless steel pot, or if we're going to use any inner racks or pot and pot cooking pieces through the process, we want to make sure that we're cleaning those as well. And we don't want to use too much moisture when we're dealing with the base, because again, that base is going to be using electricity, just as we don't want to be putting, our slow cooker base in our dishwasher or in our sink. The same goes for the electric pressure cooker. And so with that, I really wanted to demonstrate that, this is an Instant Pot inner pot, but switch out that brand, and this is what they can look like if they're not nonstick, right? If they were nonstick, there would actually be a coating within this inner piece right here. However, I have shared with you that sometimes within your inner pot, you're putting something else in. So in this case, this is a steam rack. This is something that can help as you're cooking foods, a lot of times fruits or vegetables that you're placing within your pressure cooker inner pot. This can help so it's being steam cooked and it's not directly in that liquid, that water that we're using typically. And so you want to make sure that you are cleaning both of these components. And you do want to be mindful of like stainless steel cleaner. You want to make sure that it's not going to be something abrasive because you can damage your inner pot, but you do want to make sure that it's not, that you can notice there can be residue. You can have foods that stick. A lot of times, some of those meat dishes can stick a little bit. And so you still want to be cleaning those appropriately and not leaving that residue behind in that inner pot. I've shared quite a bit with that lid that you want to remove that inner ring. You want to be removing that shield. You want to be cleaning all of those little crevices that we can find on this appliance, and that you want to make sure that you're letting everything dry appropriately too. You can dry with a hand towel or you can air dry. But when you are done cleaning all of these different pieces, you really don't want to lock that lid into place, because I've been sharing with you this whole time that these are intended to lock in those flavors, lock in those nutrients, but more than all of that, locking in that steam in order to cook the food. And so by locking that lid into place, or even setting it not upside down, but setting it right side up on top of the appliance, can help hold in some of those odors or some of that moisture. And that's something we really don't want to do throughout this process. So you can always just flip it upside down and just have it setting on your appliance, ready to go for the next time. And as I shared, don't forget that anti-block shield. You do want to be careful as you are removing it and returning it to its position on the lid so that you're not damaging, because over time, up and down, you can actually damage those. And there's little prongs holding those into place. I already shared with you that sealing ring that I pulled out, and then I still didn't have it fully put back together on that lid, but they can come in a variety of colors. They're silicone. They are intended to withstand pressure cooking. And so with that, they can be warped if you're not mindful of them, but typically they're going to do great with that moist, high temperature heat that we're applying through the cooking process. And then you want to make sure that you are drying this before you're reattaching it to your lid, so that it's not holding in moisture in that lid and what's going to contribute to odors as well as maybe pathogen growth. And you want to make sure that when you do reassemble your lid, that it is in place correctly. I can't tell you how many times where I'm trying to put my lid on, it's just not locking. And I realized I had just one little edge that I hadn't fully tucked in of my sealing ring. And that's all that I was missing to make it work correctly. Even that condensation cup that we talked about at the beginning, even that can sometimes capture moisture. Sometimes we can use our appliance several times without having any condensation collect in the cup. However, we do need to be checking that. We do need to be removing it, and we do need to be cleaning it, because here are some photos of what it looks like, how you remove it, how it slides into place. And I know you're thinking, what is this? Well, if you are not removing that, remember, we can have moisture that has food particles on it being collected into that cup. And this is someone that came to one of University of Idaho Extension's classes. They did not clean out their condensation cup, and unfortunately mold grew in that. So we want to be really mindful of all of the components of our electric pressure cookers. Another thing that I really want to emphasize today, as we're talking about electric pressure cooking for busy people, saving that time in the kitchen, is that over the years, there have been some brands that have identified models of appliances that they state you can use for electric pressure canning. However, to date, Cooperative Extension does not recommend using any electric pressure cookers as a low acid canner. And I share that because there's more than one brand and model that claims that you can conduct that. However, research conducted by Utah State University Extension found that they took 3 separate brands and models, and they conducted some research at differing elevations, and they concluded, based on their research project, that no unit that they tested came up to the necessary pressure and maintained it throughout that canning process. So we share that because Cooperative Extension is looking into some even newer models that have come out since that study was conducted about I believe it was in 2018 is when that occurred. So about 5 years ago, there's been a newer appliance and model that has come out since then, but unfortunately, we still do not recommend electric pressure cookers for this method. And Amy will actually be posting in the chat and in a follow-up email from today's presentation, we will be sharing a link to the research publication presented by Utah State University. And National Center for Home Food Preservation. This is a resource that we highly recommend if you are canning food at home. And even they have released a statement regarding canning in electric multi-cookers, which is what these appliances are. And with that, according to the National Center for Home Food Preservation, food may end up underprocessed, and if the food is underprocessed, it is unsafe and can result in foodborne illness, including botulism poisoning if consumed. And we share that because a lot of times we are selecting foods that we want to cook in our electric pressure cooker that are low acid because they can take longer to cook. And yes, we can cook them in the electric pressure cooker. We don't recommend to can them. And if you think that botulism is not a concern, I just read a news story today about someone who just got, there were 25 individuals that had poisoning that took place in France. So botulism is not something we hear about 20 years ago. It's still a concern today. So keep that in mind. And please leave the canning to the pressure canner, which this is a traditional stovetop pressure canner intended for canning that you can see in the photo here. So getting away from the canning, I just want to make sure that we're really mindful and that we are using these appliances safely, not only to cook, but we don't use them to can if that's not their intention. But another key safety concern that we have is as I shared at the top, I've had people tell me, oh, I love my electric pressure cooker. I can set it, I can forget it, and then I can time it so that I have dinner ready when I walk through the door. You know, some of us are busy parents. Maybe we're walking home with kiddos and we need to get dinner on the table, not now, but 5 minutes ago. And so while these appliances can help in that process, we don't recommend that you use a pre-function timer to cook food that is still frozen if you're not going to be immediately eating it. And we don't recommend that you are cooking from a frozen state your red meats. Some preliminary research on that has shown that it is not being cooked to an adequate internal temperature if it's being cooked in your electric pressure cooker from a frozen state. Chicken has been found that it is safe, but those red meats are not recommended at this time. And then the biggest thing that I'm referring to is placing that frozen, that unthawed food in your electric pressure cooker and presetting it to cook at a later time. That is not recommended. So some appliances have a delayed start function. And what that means is you may pre-program it that you're headed out the door to work at 7:30 in the morning, but you have delayed started it to start cooking at maybe 3 p.m. That means that you are holding this food at a room temperature, even though it's in that device, it's still at room temperature, and you're holding that for a prolonged time, and you can have quite a buildup of pathogen growth if it's currently present. And so we do not recommend that you do a delayed start of your food in that method. Unfortunately, we still recommend to go ahead and get home and have it planned out so that you can get it on quickly, get it cooled, and get it on your dinner table. And so the reason why we really emphasize that is a lot of people think, no, it's going to be fine because it's going to be electric pressure cooking. It's going to be at that higher temperature. And unfortunately, we consider that the same as leaving it on the counter. We don't recommend that you leave frozen or thawing foods on the counter. We recommend that you do that either in the refrigerator. Yes, it takes a little bit longer. It takes a little more upfront planning, but it is the safest recommendation that we have. You can also do it under cool running water. And in some cases, we have microwave thawing recommendations. But again, you're cooking it immediately following that thawing technique. And then the reason why we don't recommend that you thaw things on the counter or leave them thawing in your electric pressure cooker is that we cannot guarantee that the pressure that you will be utilizing for that specific dish is going to be a high enough, hot enough temperature to kill the potential pathogens that could be present or have grown in that process. And just as when you are cooking not from a frozen state. So once you have that food in your pressure cooker, you've set your timer, your program, whatever you've done to conduct for the day, we still don't recommend that you say, well, I cooked it in the pressure cooker, it's got to be safe. Unfortunately, no cooking technique or method is going to outweigh the use and the safety of a thermometer. So we always recommend that you use a thermometer specifically for those meat, egg dishes, even some of those custards that you may be preparing in these devices. And that's the only way that we can guarantee the safety of that food product. One thing that we'll share after today is also an additional resource. It is a guide to using and caring for your electric pressure cooker, programmable pressure cooker. And so we'll send that out there. This is an easy to access online publication that can really walk through a lot of the components that we've talked about today. So if you have a friend that you really want to share this information with, you could share that. And I know Amy is going to post a link to that content into the chat. But before we conclude, we have several things. We're actually going to be cooking a quick recipe here in a moment with my colleague and friend, Maddie Anderson. And with that, I do want to remind you that we have several upcoming lessons in our series. So this is one of 9 different topics. So we're here on the 19th. Coming up next week, we have Vegging Out, Guide to Vegetarian Cooking. So we're actually going to have a colleague from University of Georgia, Jesse Moore, will be leading us through vegetarian meals. So check out our lineup. You can sign up for one, some, or all of these topics. If you have a friend, feel free to share that with them as well. You can just go register and they are free to attend. Before we go straight into our demonstration with Maddie, I do want to launch another quick poll. So I promise this one is really quick. The first question is, after today, do you plan to attend future extension classes or presentations? It doesn't have to be one in our series. It could be one in-person class coming up within your state. The next one is, did you enjoy today's lesson? Remember, this is completely anonymous. Please be as honest as you would like, as I'll never know, but it genuinely helps us as we are structuring our programs for you. And then after attending this presentation, do you plan to cook using an electric pressure cooker? And so those are 3 quick questions. If you can answer those, our whole team greatly appreciates it. And then we're going to slide right into walking through a couple of different models as we prepare brown sugar carrots with you today. So those of you that were registered by yesterday morning received a reminder email for today's presentation, as well as I sent out a separate email so you should have received one from Zoom. I'm hoping, if everything's functioning correctly, you received an automated email from Zoom as a reminder for today, but in the afternoon, I emailed you with a recipe for electric pressure cooking. There were a variety of recipes. There's chicken breast, there's brown rice, so some just really traditional recipes that are really fun ones in our house. But brown sugar carrots is a great one if you're trying to create a spin on some vegetables for the household. And so we're going to walk through that today. But I'm going to end the poll. So thank you for participating in that. And wow. Fun. This is the front page of the recipes that if you did not receive by yesterday, as a follow-up to today's presentation, you will all be receiving this. So as I shared, it's chicken breast, we got brown rice, we've got the brown sugar carrots is what I am going to be doing right now. And then the back of this handout has a couple of other fun recipes that are big favorites of Amy's and I. But we're going to start with brown sugar carrots. I shared with you that Maddie's here in our room with me. She is the 4-H program coordinator for Owyhee County with University of Idaho. And so she has washed her hands before we got started. And now she is going to walk us through our recipes. So with our recipe, could you tell us our first ingredient, Maddie?
Yeah, so the first ingredient that we're going to need is carrots. So we can use, the recipe calls for 32 ounces of baby carrot, which is what we have here. But it is also definitely an option for you to be using whole carrots or carrots from your garden. Obviously, you'd be cleaning those and prepping them accordingly. But today we are going to use our baby carrots. And we are going to open those up and just empty them right into our Instant Pot.
Sorry, inner pot.
Inner pot.
So as Maddie said, if you have carrots on hand, feel free to use this with those carrots. There's no need to run to the grocery store. So she has placed those into the clean inner pot that is sitting on our heating base. Our appliance is plugged in, but we haven't selected any functions or anything.
And our next step is going to be adding butter. This recipe calls for 4 tablespoons of butter, and it also has salt on our recipe ingredients, but today we're using salted butter, so we won't be needing to add that salt. So we're going to go ahead and add our 4 tablespoons of butter, which I have prepared here. And then the recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of water. You can also utilize chicken stock, which we're going to be using today. And then finally, we are going to be adding brown sugar. Helpful if it's softened. You can pop that in the microwave if your brown sugar has gotten a little hard.
Ours is nice and soft, as you can see.
And that was 1/2 cup of brown sugar.
So as Maddie shared, the recipe calls for water. Remember, we are trying to build up steam pressure in our cooking process with these appliances. So the addition of liquid is key. And when you are cooking different foods, a recommendation average is a cup of liquid in your recipes. In this instance, we're doing carrots, which contain a high moisture content themselves. And then we're adding that chicken stock or water, or you could do 1/2 and 1/2. If you're trying to be really mindful of your sodium or your sugar intake, you could reduce or omit some of those ingredients. But again, we're trying to put a fun little flair. But if you're trying to reduce some sugar, maybe you're putting in a tablespoon rather than the allotted quantity in the recipe.
So then we're going to make sure that our seal is in all the way. It was popped off, so I'm glad that I checked. And go ahead and close our lid.
What is nice about these lids is some of the models actually have little indicators on the lid, and it will say open or close, and it helps you so that you can line your lid up as if it's a puzzle piece and make sure that you are able to put it on and then lock it into place. In this case, Maddie has now added that lid. She has locked it into place, but we still have a few more steps to conduct here.
So our next step is to set our timer for 4 minutes.
So with that, dependent on what brand and model that you have, you may need to select some type of function. So some of these contain a saute or browning function that's actually intended to just heat the bottom of that inner pot. So similar to browning some ground meat, that's what that intended function will do. It will not actually pressure cook. If you lock it into place, it's only intended for a sauteing or browning purpose. However, we are trying to pressure cook. So we're hearing beautiful noises over here. So Maddie selected a programmed function and then she adjusted that time. So as you are becoming familiar with your appliance, you may find that some pre-programmed functions automatically set for 10 minutes or 12 minutes, or if it's like a porridge, maybe 20 or 22 minutes. And with that, you can adjust. There are up and down arrows so we can add or subtract some of that time to cook. One of the things that Maddie did with that lid is after she locked it into place, she adjusted our port sealer. So this is our vent port cover. So on the top of our lid, there will be one side that is intended for sealing, another for venting. Remember, when we are trying to build up that steam pressure, we want to make sure that it is set at sealing. And so now in our case, the exact model that we used indicated through audible noise to us that it has heard us as we selected that program function. And now we still see that it's on because remember, while our brown sugar carrots take 4 minutes, that is 4 minutes of pressure cooking. So it's now going to be coming up to the temperature, and then those 4 minutes will begin for that process, that cooking process. So with that, that is cooking in the background. But remember, at the top, we shared that we were going to answer questions with you today. So I'm going to let Amy tell me if we have any questions that have come in.
You read my mind, Serene. I was just about to pull them up. So the first question is, do the silicone liners work?
A great question. Yes, they absolutely do work. So they are intended similar to a gasket. They are intended to create that airtight seal. So they absolutely work. They work so well that over time they can actually kind of retain odors and so there's if you do a lot of pressure cooking, you may even start to have a silicone ring in one color intended for a savory cooking types of recipes, as well as maybe a different colored silicone ring intended for sweet dishes. So yes, they work and they work well. Great question.
And I myself haven't used a silicone liner, but I have used different silicone dishes inside my pressure cooker for making a variety of dishes. So I've made cakes, I've made egg bites. So any silicone products I've used have worked really good.
And I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. So
that's I think that was the question. If we didn't quite hit the mark, please let us know. The next question is, I don't really have an answer. I'm hoping you do, Serene. Does rabbit cook similar to chicken?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
We've got Maddie, who was a rabbit producer back in the day, but yes, it does cook very similarly to chicken. That's a great question.
Okay, that was my assumption, but thank you for answering that. Looking in the Q&A, I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm checking the chat. It doesn't look like there was anything there. But definitely, if you do have a question, please pop that into the Q&A so we don't miss it.
We would love that. And the fun doesn't have to stop here today, everyone. So maybe following today's presentation, you can get to thinking on something. Maybe you're like, you know what? They didn't answer my question on the silicone liners. Please feel free to reach out to us. Amy and I both have worked on pressure cooking, so I'm super lucky that she was my chat helper today. And so we have done a lot of classes on these. We both use these frequently at home in our own cooking and baking and dessert making needs, and so across the board. So on the screen here, you can see my email for Serene Greenway, and then again, Amy Robertson is our chat helper, and her email is also included on the screen right now. And so you could easily email us with any of those questions or follow-up comments if you had. But with that, I am going to stay on. I know we're coming really close to our time today. We like to be very mindful, no matter where you are or when you're joining. And so we try to respect your 1 hour, but we really hope you consider some of our other topics coming up. But I'm going to stay on as we cook our brown sugar carrots. So if you want to stay on, you could see this process to the end. I also have a variety of models and appliances behind me. So maybe you wanted to see one specifically. I've got a heavy duty one. It's a Ninja brand that's actually intended for pressure cooking or air frying. And we could even talk about how that can occur. So I will be on, but if not, otherwise, we hope you have a great day and we hope you consider taking our survey. I hope that that's been placed in the chat. If not, here's our plug for a survey. And if you complete the survey at that link, you will be entered into a drawing. It will be anonymous, but it will link you to a raffle entry. And if you complete that survey, you'll be entered into a raffle drawing for a $20 Amazon gift card. We encourage you to tune in each week as those prizes may change. So we have a couple of fun prizes coming up that are different every week. So with that, if you take that survey, you're entered into that $20 Amazon gift card.